Hey guys, so today I will be presenting some of the findings I had from my practitioner articles. Overall, mine had a large discussion about explicit instruction and executive functioning, how those go hand in hand, and how they go hand in hand in a secondary mathematics classroom, specifically working with special needs students. First and foremost, explicit instruction and executive functioning. What are they? Why do they work together? Explicit instruction is exactly what it sounds like. It is very clear, concise instruction. We will actually go over specific examples of that in a few slides here. And then executive functioning is those skills that students need to correctly complete tasks, right? So time management, being able to break down a task and figure out the steps of that task, remain on task, things like that. All right. So a little about me real fast, my classroom and my background. So I am a learning support / emotional support teacher at the secondary level. I wear a lot of hats. I teach Algebra 1 A and B, which is a slower version of Algebra 1. It's a year-long class versus a semester. I teach geometry. I teach Algebra 2. And I also teach an Algebra 1 resource room, as well as a three different levels of a mathematics intervention class. That is at the second, third, and fourth grade level. So I do a lot, which also means that I know so many fun little tips and tricks for so many different levels of students. So if you ever have any questions about a specific student, please feel free to reach out. I cannot promise I know, but I can promise that I have some ideas for you, right? So as you can see here, I kind of put up some photos of, I have some kiddos that we are learning single digit addition. I have some kiddos that we are learning the different shapes in geometry, and I have some kiddos that are, using imaginary numbers. Anywho, so for two scenarios, I have one student who has a reading disability. I work with a student very often. He has dyslexia and dysgraphia as well, and he has a reading disability in reading comprehension, oral reading fluency, written expression, basic reading, just about everything you can imagine. So this student has, as you can imagine, difficulty in math when it comes to decoding and those word-heavy problems. Um, so he is one student that we will discuss some things that I do for him and do for students that have issues similar to his. And the other student I'm going to discuss is a student that has behavioral needs. So this student does still have a learning disability, but his primary difficulty is in his executive functioning. He has a really hard time completing assignments, keeping things organized, things like that. And he's also very quick to get out of his seat, refuse to do work, put his head down. He's very easily frustrated. So we'll kind of talk about how I help both those students. Alrighty. So first things first, why explicit instruction? So this is an evidence-based practice. It helps in every subject you can possibly imagine, but I'm going to specifically talk about math. Okay, so first things first with explicit instruction is, as you can imagine, it's explicit, right? So clear, concise modeling. An example of this that I use is PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And this is actually this visual I have up here for you is very similar to something I have hanging in my classroom. And this goes ahead, gives them the actual, PEMDAS. It breaks down what each of them mean. It's color coded, it's beautiful. And this is just something that I go over with my students and then leave up for them, right? So we're going to model nice and clear how to complete this. And then this is going to be up for them to continue to have as a modeling tool as we practice. Something else is examples versus non-examples. So with my students in geometry or with my students in my math intervention course, I take the time to make sure that we learn about examples and then we learn about non-examples and what those look like, right? Because a lot of times on tests will try to trick you. They'll give you your non-example. And if you don't know any better, you're not going to understand that that's a trick. Next things, guided practice. So this is critical for students with disabilities, with and without disabilities, but especially with disabilities. They need to gain that confidence whilst working with you through guided practice. This is also known as the we do section of I do, we do, you do, if you're familiar with that. Active engagement, immediate feedback. So in a couple other PD sessions that I have done about just specifically explicit instruction, having active engagement and immediate feedback is a huge, huge part of addressing your instruction to make sure that you are meeting the needs of your students. So in this picture, I just have a student raising a one. This is something I will do with my students. I will say 1, 2, 3, and like label things as put up one finger, put up two fingers, put up three fingers. I also do the fun whiteboard. We do flashcards. There's plenty of things you can do. You can even cut little pieces of colored paper and, pop those up for kiddos to answer. And that's just a really quick formative assessment for you as a teacher. It also keeps them engaged. And when students are engaged, they are comprehending and they are actually absorbing that material you're teaching them. Vocab. So I think a lot of people sometimes overlook how important vocab is in the mathematics world. So students struggle with multiple meaning math terms or just math terms in general. I have a lot of students that don't understand what a quotient is, what a product is. And there's a couple things we can do to help this with an explicit instruction. First things first is to replace informal terms with formal terms. So instead of saying answer, I would say product. So I'm going to say, oh, the product for 2 plus 2 is 4, not the answer is 2 plus 2. Because when they are looking at a test or at a worksheet, it is going to ask them for the product. And you don't want them to be thrown off, right? Because they see the word product, that is instantly going to shut those students down, and they're just not going to even attempt. Explicit vocabulary instructions. So kind of piggybacking off the informal and the formal, is explicit vocabulary activities. So giving students word walls, flashcards, practicing with them. What is a quotient? What is a product? What is a sum? What is multiplication? What is an exponent? What is a parenthesis, right? Working with students so that is an automatic for them, because then they are not 3 steps behind when we are learning a new concept. If I have to teach a student a new concept and then within there also teach them what a parenthesis is, what a parenthesis means, and so on and so forth, they are that much behind their general education peers, which is just embarrassing for them, and it leads them to just kind of give up, right? We don't want that. We want to give them that explicit vocabulary instruction prior to the explicit instruction of the actual topic. Memory support. So this is more where we dive into the executive functioning. They do play hand in hand, but this is more the executive functioning side of things. So, checklist, visuals, step reminders. I love writing a step-by-step instruction on the board for a project for my students. Some of my students, I create a checklist for them. If we have a big project coming up, I will give them a checklist of, okay, you need to do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And it really helps them because it allows them to not become frustrated and overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I have this big task and I don't know where to start, and then they just give up. So this is a huge, huge help for your students that might struggle with the executive functioning. Piggybacking off of that is supporting the generalization of skills. So I have students that can multiply really well using a multiplication chart. But then when we move on to like just facts, we're lost because we have not been able to generalize that skill and realize that these two things are the same, right? Or the reason I have the hands up is because of the nines trick. If you're not familiar with the nines trick, it's a fun little way to do your nines times tables. And that's something that students sometimes don't realize. Oh, this is all the same skill, right? So making sure that students are able to generalize that skill so they're able to switch strategies, transition into other skills where multiplication is needed or any other skill. We're almost done, guys, I promise. Hope I'm not boring you too much. So, on the side of executive functioning, once again, supporting on-task behavior. So you might have a student like my behavioral student who, if you give him a task and just say, do it, it's going to instantly, he's going to shut down, he's going to give up, he's going to get up, he's going to find 14 other things to do. He's going to sharpen his pencil, he's going to go to the bathroom, he's going to go get a drink of water, he's going to just straight up refuse to do it, all because that's too much for him. His executive functioning skills, they're not great. And so to him, this big task is here, it's overwhelming, I'm done. Versus saying, hey, here's a timer. I want you to work for 3 minutes, and then you can take a 1 minute break, and so on and so forth. That really helps with the executive functioning. Something to try. Also, a take a break card is another thing. That's why it's up there for you. I have some students that have break cards that they can just look at me and go, I need a break. Now, that is used sparingly, depends on the student. Of course, you don't want that to be abused, but just an idea. How do these two things work together? So I think it is pretty self-explanatory, but explicit instruction, giving that explicit instruction, giving those tools and those accommodations and modifications is what directly ties the executive functioning in, because it allows for the executive functioning workload of the brain to kind of, it won't have to work as hard. If I give a student a checklist, that student that really struggles with that skill isn't going to have to struggle with that skill, which gives them that much more room in their brains to work on the academic skill, if that makes sense. So as I have here my fun little Venn diagram, explicit instruction and executive functioning come together for success. Okay. Limitations, they're always there. We always have to talk about them. We are in the public school system after all. In my personal building, we do not have the resources necessarily all the time. We don't usually have the time. We don't really have the teachers. I think a lot of these things are amazing when you think about them and look at them from the outside looking in, but when you're actually in it, there's just not always enough time in your day, which actually leads me to my next thing. So future plans. As for professional development from here on out, I think it would be fantastic if we could all go back and maybe write down a few things that we would like to maybe get prepared for our students to aid in explicit instruction. So maybe that is, making and laminating some answer cards for students to throw up. Maybe that is talking and communicating with case managers of students with disabilities to discuss, does so and so need a timer? Does so and so need a break card? What do we think? And I think that'd be a great professional development, is to actually give us some time to complete that, as well as kind of we can even work on very specific problems in a follow-up professional development and really work on, a case by case basis with students. So as I always say, keep going, keep growing, and thank you so much.